saving technique is to do intercropping. So what we've done here is when we were transplanting cabbages, we also seeded radishes between the rows. And we're going to be harvesting the radishes 30 days later at the moment where the leaves of the cabbage are ready to touch one another and form the canopy. And so it's great synchronicity. It allows us to produce 2 crops on the same bed, saving us both time and space. Here we find ourselves in the hoop house preparing a seed bed in the middle of the season. I grow in a northern climate, and so we'll try and do as many successions as possible, doing first seedlings in the spring, summer, and in the fall. I've never really liked to use the walk-behind tractor inside the hoop house because it's hard to maneuver and it creates some nasty fumes that I don't want to handle. I've replaced the walk-behind tractor with a small cultivator that shallowly works the soil, mixes in the amendment on the first inch, and that is powered by a battery drill. This tilther is just the perfect companion if you're either not ready to scale up to the full-on walk-behind tractor, let's say you're on a smaller parcel, or if you're in an urban farm. But here, we use it mainly to do our bed prep inside the greenhouse and all of our hoop houses. The drawback to this little gizmo is that small rocks tend to jam the mechanism, so you need to take time to remove them using your bed preparation rake. Most crops will require at least an inch of water per week, and you can't leave it to chance. You need to make sure that your watering system is fully functional from the start of the season to the end in case there's a drought, a strong heat wave, or simply when you're direct seeding into your soil, making sure that you're keeping the surface of the soil moist and wet throughout the germination process. On the farm, we use mostly overhead sprinklers because you can water more than one bed at the same time. But we also use drip irrigation, but mostly on crops that are under landscape fabric or under a caterpillar tunnel or in the greenhouse, because we can't count on rainfall in those occasions. Take into account that drip irrigation might be great to save water, but it's a lot more work than putting overhead sprinklers. You need to remove each drip per bed every time you're hoeing between the rows. So that factors in, if you're doing 2 or 3 hoeing per crops per year, that's a lot of drips to move around. To feed our irrigation system, we use pond water from a pond that we dug, which is about 500 feet away from the gardens. And to really make sure that we're not losing any downtime walking back and forth from the pump, we put an electrical pump that is wired to our tool shed located in the middle of all the gardens. This way, from the flip of a switch, we can easily turn on and off the irrigation system, which sometimes can happen 3 or 4 times a day. Each one of our 10 garden plots is served by 2 valves running from a main line going around the farm. This means we can have 2 sprinkler lines per plot, each covering 4 or 8 beds, depending on which sprinkler we use. Each line is fitted with a camlock coupler on both ends, so we can move them around quickly without having to point them in any specific direction. Whenever possible, we try to grow together crops that we know will need irrigation. This not only saves water, but reduces the number of times we need to move the lines around. Weed prevention is a big part of successful market gardening, and keeping all the weeds in check is not an easy thing to do on a 2-acre or 1-acre market garden. We have a couple of tricks that really help. By using intensive spacings, you're quickly creating a canopy that shades out the weeds. On most crops, you'll be cultivating the soil once or twice, and then you're done with the weeds. We're also using a lot of tarps that allows us to cover the ground. As you've seen, they're also helping a lot to diminish the weed pressure in the garden. We use flame weeding, stale seed beds, and even black plastic mulch that we use on certain crops to avoid weeding at all. But even with all of these tricks, weeds still want to pop up in the garden. And that's why we've been following two simple principles over the years that can really help you out finding the right way to tackle weeds. You need to be cultivating the soil and not just weeding. When I talk about cultivating, what I mean is that you're shallowly disturbing the soil using hose. And if there are weeds that are germinating or popping up, the simple action of mixing the soil up will destroy them right there and then. By cultivating your soil with hose, you're also breaking up the crust, allowing moisture and air to easily penetrate the soil, which should give your crops an extra fertility boost. The best time to do this is when the weeds are, just starting to show or at the 1 or 2 leaf stage. The bigger the weed, the harder it is to do the job effectively. You need to be cultivating when it's bright and sunny outside so that your soil is dry and any uprooted weeds won't have time to reroot itself. Bright and sunny and really early on is the better way to do it. And then it's all a matter of having the right hoe for the right job. We use different kinds of tools for cultivating, but our favorite ones are long-handled stirrup hoes with swiveling, double-sided cutting blades. They cut the weeds just below the surface, both on the push and pull motion, so it's very fast and efficient, but also ergonomic. When you're working long hours in the field, remember to always keep your back straight. Make sure you have properly sized tools that allow you to do so. We use 3-inch hoes for crops planted in 4 or 5 rows per bed, and the wider 5-inch hoe for crops grown in 2 or 3 rows. We also use a wheel hoe with a very wide blade for some of the crops we grow in 1 row and also to weed the pathways. Keeping your hoes sharp makes a huge difference in terms of efficiency. We sharpen them weekly with an electric grinder, and we carry a handheld carbide sharpener for touch-ups while cultivating in the fields. We're always trying out new tools, and we've been experimenting with a battery-powered version of the wheel hoe, which we think could be a promising time saver for some applications. So the second thing is never let weeds go to seeds, because when that happens, you multiply your problem by about 1,000,000 times. One Galisoga plant can give out up to 80,000 weed seeds just around it. We've been practicing this for many years, and I can tell you for a fact that we still have weeds, but we have a lot less weed pressure than we used to. One other trick to hold back weeds on the farm is to use plastic mulch. The big difference between them and landscape fabric is that, they cost 1/5 of the price, and you can configure your holes according to different spacings, so they're more versatile in that way. We use biodegradable plastic mulch. They're certified organic. What ends up happening is that they'll photodegrade at the end of the year. We harvest everything and we'll cover the plastic mulch with dirt, and then we're good to go for the next year. So we use a lot of mulches on the farm, landscape fabric and biodegradable mulch, and we also use some natural straw. Word of caution about using straw as a mulch is that if it comes from conventional farming, most often than not, it can come with herbicides residue that can be really noxious for your crops. If it's from an organic farm, well, most often it's pretty expensive and rare, and if you find some, you need to make sure that there's no weed seeds in the straw. Otherwise, you're creating a big mess for yourself in the years to come. The straw we use on our garlic is made from first cut fall rye. It's harvested early in the summer before any weeds have gone to seed, so it's almost guaranteed to be free of any herbicides. Another way to control weeds is to use the stale seedbed technique. The idea is to prepare the bed 10 to 15 days before the seeding date, giving weed seeds time to germinate.
When we're ready to seed, we come back and shallowly work the soil again to destroy the weeds that have popped up.
The more weeds you can get rid of before you plant, the less you'll have to deal with afterwards. And you can use row covers, you can make sure that your beds are always kept wet, or even use clear plastic to stimulate weed growth. You can push the stale seedbed technique even further by using a flame weeder. We use this for carrots on the farm. We'll prepare our soil 10 days prior to the seeding date. And then carrots, they'll take from 8 to 12 days to germinate. So that leaves about 20 days head start for the weeds to pop up. Then, just before the carrots are ready to emerge, we go with the flame weeder and we burn all the weeds that have popped up, leaving our carrots to germinate in guaranteed weed-free soil.
The flame weeder doesn't burn them right off, but gives small weeds a fatal thermal shock. Flame weeding is something you absolutely have to do right. Otherwise, you'll have made the situation worse by promoting weed growth in the first place. We use a flame weeder with 5 burners to make sure we cover the entire bed, and it's also shielded on the side so that we can use it even in windy conditions. To know exactly when our carrots are about to emerge from the ground, we throw in a handful of beet seeds at the start of the bed as an indicator. Under the same growing conditions, beets will always emerge before carrot seeds. If you're growing beets, use radishes instead as the indicator.
One misconception that I hear often is that if you do everything right, if your soil is prepared the right way, if you're using the right amendments, if you're doing everything right, you shouldn't have any insect problems. Well, I don't know about that, but I've been farming commercially for the last 13 years, and insects and problems with them have always been part of the scene. I've also never visited an organic farm that didn't have any insect problems. You're better off dealing with them than having this wishful thinking that they just won't appear. How we go about it is that we make sure that we know what the possible problems are ahead of time and we try to prepare for them. Our favorite solutions is these insect nets. They're a mechanical barrier that will give you peace of mind that your crops is protected underneath it. So there's different nets with different hole size, the mesh size. And that makes a difference because the smaller the size, the weaker the net is, and it's going to wear and tear after just a couple of years. There's other nets that have bigger size mesh, and these are more rugged and strong. So it's not a one size fit all. You need to know which insect you want to protect your crop against, and then you find the net for that insect. The mesh size for sweet midge is not the same one as, let's say, for the cucumber beetle. The other thing is that you should be knowing in advance which insect might become a problem in your garden and have a protocol to make sure that it's taken care of when you're either transplanting or taking care of everything else. It's possible to use row covers to protect your crops against insect, but you need to remember that row covers, they trap in the extra heat. So when you're in the spring and in the fall, this is really what you want, but in the heat of the summer, when it gets really hot, that extra heat can become a big problem for certain crops. So that's why we substitute them for these insect nets. They don't have any thermal capacities, won't trap extra heat, and the crops will breathe a lot easier, and they'll do the job just as well. Here's a great example of why insect nets are so important. You see the difference between crops that have been covered and crops that haven't been covered, attacked by the flea beetles. A great way to never let this happen is to always make sure that you're putting the nets when you're seeding the crop. It's at that moment in time that you're focused on what you're doing, you're putting the nets right there and then, and you'll be sure then that you won't get any problems later on. So the take-home message here is make sure that when you're seeding, you're always putting your insect nets at that moment in time.
Insect nets are a great help, but for crops like squash that require pollination, you'll have to take them out once your plant starts flowering.